are these people?
Angel's asking, what is the United Nations actually going to do to close Gitmo? Not a damn thing. They are virtual signaling. We'll see. I'm sure it's strongly worded letters as always, because that's all we tend to get. But
they got their good pens out for writing that one.
Right. So Yumna Rivzi over at Truth Out, a new UN report condemns Guantanamo and calls on Biden to close it. The U.S. government is being given good counsel by the UN expert, and it's time the White House took it seriously. I'm going to tell you right now that's probably not going to happen. They tend to not take things seriously. Last week, Finolia New Owlane, I'm sure I butchered that name terribly, but the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Counterterrorism and Human Rights released a scathing report on her visit to the Guantanamo Bay detention camp. The report, the first of its kind, once again brought the world's attention to the profound, far-reaching impact that the use of torture and arbitrary detention by the United States has had not just on the minds and bodies of former and current detainees, but also on the victims and survivors of 9/11, their families, and families of detainees, because that's who's there. On the same day, President Joe Biden and Secretary of State Anthony Blinken marked the UN's International Day in support of victims of torture by releasing statements condemning torture and emphasizing the importance of upholding human rights and accountability, as the U.S. urges other countries to put an end to torture and provide redress to victims. The new UN report is a glaring reminder that the U.S. must meet its international obligations to do the same. The Biden admin is the first to allow a UN expert to visit Guantanamo, demonstrating commitment to its promise of closing Guantanamo and their international human rights. While it's a good first step, it's not enough, according to the Special Rapporteur. The current condition at the site, without doubt, amounts to ongoing, cruel, inhumane, and degrading treatment, and may also meet the legal threshold for torture. So this is the UN saying this, pretty much, which we know how they feel about torture.
May meet the standard?
May.
Have they seen the pictures?
Yes. Or the musical that's based out of there.
No, I didn't know about that.
There is a Gitmo. There is a Gitmo musical, in case people are wondering. So the grim fact is that indefinite detention and systematic arbitrariness remain a reality at Guantanamo and beyond. The Bush's admin's choice to commit gross human rights violations and of successive administrations before to not reckon with the past has cast a long shadow, resulting in a situation where current and former detainees have been stripped of their most fundamental human rights and are forced to confront an ever-shifting and unpredictable reality that causes continued psychological harm. So the report by the UN Special Rapporteur provides a valuable roadmap for addressing the long-standing concerns surrounding Guantanamo and torture. It emphasizes the need for transparency, accountability, and adherence to international human rights standards, but more importantly calls for the closure of Guantanamo altogether. Today, a finite group of 30 detainees remain, 16 of whom are cleared for transfer. They must be transferred immediately, and the Biden administration must swiftly resolve the cases of those who remain in the failed military commission system. In his statement, Biden said, tortures destroy lives, families, and communities, and followed with examples of heinous methods of torture perpetrated by Russia and Syria. The sad truth is that until 14 years ago, when Barack Obama issued an executive order ending torture as interrogation method, Russian and Syrian could have been replaced with the U.S. throughout the statement, and it would remain factual. That is evident in the Special Rapporteur's report. From the torture methods she notes to the ongoing arbitrary detention and inhumane conditions imposed on detainees by the U.S. after 1911. So they're blaming Russia and Syria for torture on American soil. So that's nice.
Wait, how are Syrians torturing on American soil?
Well, he's just saying he's just doing whataboutism classically.
Oh,
right?
okay.
You know, he's just like, oh yeah, Russia and Syria, they torture, but you know, like we're kind of also. So,
yeah.
As the UN report notes, torture perpetrated by the U.S. in the name of victims of 9/11 was betrayal of the rights and as victims of terrorism. In fact, 9/11 families have been denied accountability and justice for their loss and suffering for more than 2 decades because of the role of torture in tainting the military commission tribunals at Guantanamo. As former Chief Defense Counsel Brig General John Baker said in a statement to the Senate Judiciary Committee almost 2 years ago, at the heart of the commission's problems is their original sin, torture. From the beginning, justice was an afterthought. So they're saying that even the families that are affected by this can't get justice because, they tortured some folks, essentially. The ongoing failure to completely address that original sin has broken lives and devastated the families of both victims of terrorism and victims of torture. In 21, Biden said torture goes against everything we stand for as a nation, and we must never again resort to its use. Yet, the government's response to the special rapporteur blatantly disregards the reality, in particular, the long documented deficiencies in medical care, which include broken and inadequate equipment, lack of medical staff, and medical histories devoid of past torture and trauma, among others. Earlier this year, 7 UN experts and the International Committee of the Red Cross also raised concerns about the systematic shortcomings in medical expertise, equipment, treatment, and accommodations at Gitmo. As a special rapporteur pointed out, access to counsel, communication with families, and standing operating procedures are also impacted by the arbitrary nature of the detention regime. Rather than acknowledging and addressing the gaps that exist, administration after administration continues to defend and sustain human rights violations. The U.S. government is being given good counsel by the UN expert, and it is past time that they begin to follow it. So, this rapporteur, Nee Aulane, also called on the U.S. to fulfill its obligations to investigate and prosecute allegations of torture, noting there is no statute of limitations for torture. Anyone who undertook it, facilitated it, legally authorized it, hid it, sustained it, remains liable for torture for the entirety of their lives. While most of us won't hold our breath that most responsible for torture will be prosecuted, the government can and must provide forms of redress immediately. The Biden admin didn't open Guantanamo, but it can close it. They must finish the job rather than continue to delay and continue to sustain the judgment and democracy of the world. The U.S. government owes a formal apology, reparations, and support to the people who they tortured, as well as their families, and they must begin addressing the long-term impacts of these abuses. Hell, they're about to vote in someone who worked there. So, we'll see how that goes. But, closing thoughts, Yeti?
It's just... Let me collect my thought for a second.
Yep. Barack Obama didn't do a damn thing to close Gitmo.
Like it's just everything they always project is what they're doing.
Yeah.
Which leads me to believe that even the most heinous things they've accused others of, they must be doing themselves.
Yep.
Like the fact that Guantanamo Bay is still open, this whole UN thing is, as far as I'm concerned, it's probably just propaganda to make it look like they're doing something. Nothing's going to happen. Like,
yeah.
I fully think the rapporteur is just knowingly just spewing things to make it sound like she did her job.
Well, and she might be doing her job. And this is what happens when you do your job, is that they don't listen to you. They ignore you. I mean, this has been clearly the case for that for a while now. I don't think, I mean, when was a few good men? Like 1980 something.
I was going to say maybe 90s.
Right. And so, and we knew of the problems that they had at that facility then, so it's still that way. Nothing's changed. I think it's the fact that some people and government feel like that facility needs to exist for them to torture. That has to be the only reason they keep it.
Well, yeah, it's also on Cuba territory.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure Cuba does not want them there.
No.
I can almost 100% guarantee that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, I wonder if that's why the States is getting a little itchy with China and Russia potentially putting naval bases there now.
Yeah. I mean, that's partially why we still have Gitmo is because of that, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.